sold my land while I was halfway across the world. Can you believe that? These HOA bastards didn't just overstep, they bulldozed my entire family's legacy right under my nose. The words came out sharp, like a shot fired in the quiet of a morning that should have been peaceful. I'm Jack Turner, veteran, son, someone who never thought I'd have to fight a war on my own soil after coming back from one overseas. If you're watching this, drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from, and trust me, you want to stick around till the end. Because what I did to those HOA jerks, they'll never forget it, not ever. This wasn't just about some plot of dirt. This was my father's land, the same land where I learned how to fish off the old dock he built with his bare hands, the land where my family's kayak rested every summer morning, waiting for me to push off into the misty lake, chasing peace before the world got too loud. Losing it felt like losing a piece of my own soul. When I got that letter, no warning, no heads up, it hit me like a punch to the gut. Property sold, the words blurred on the page. Sold? By who? How? I was deployed, thousands of miles away, boots on foreign soil, fighting for this country, and somehow they thought they could just sell what was mine, what was ours? I remember sitting in that tiny barracks room, my fingers trembling over the phone. Calling the county clerk's office felt like dialing into a nightmare. The woman on the other end confirmed it all. Some backroom deal, paperwork forged faster than I could catch my breath. The HOA president, Victoria Calloway, was at the center of it, a woman who smiled like a saint but played a serpent behind closed doors. I swear, the betrayal burned hotter than the desert sun on patrol. But it wasn't just about land, it was about respect, about what you owe the people who come before you. My dad's voice echoed in my mind that day, telling me, Jack, no one's going to hand you your rights. You have to fight for them. So fight I would, but this wasn't a battlefield I was trained for. It was quieter, sneakier, filled with papers, signatures, and rules that felt designed to drown out the little guy. They thought because I was gone, I'd be an easy mark, that I'd roll over. They didn't count on me learning how to play their game and then break their rules in ways they never expected. Before we go further, I need to know, where are you watching from? Drop it down below, because this fight isn't just mine. It's for anyone who's ever been pushed around by some power-hungry suit hiding behind rules. And when this is over, those HOA bastards, they'll know exactly who they messed with. Coming back home was like walking into a different world. The neighborhood had changed. Fences were higher, private property signs popped up like weeds, and the quiet lakefront had a new tension hanging in the air. My driveway, the same path my dad once cleared with a rusty old tractor, was blocked by a locked gate with a smiling HOA notice taped to it, access restricted. The neighbors I grew up with looked at me sideways, whispering, eyes darting. Some nodded in sympathy, others were tight-lipped. That gate was more than wood and metal. It was a message. You don't belong here anymore. I tried talking to Victoria at the next HOA meeting. She greeted me with that perfect smile, the kind that never reached her eyes. Welcome home, Mr. Turner, she said, voice syrupy. We're just trying to maintain the community standards. You understand how important that is. I bit back a sarcastic reply. Community standards? Funny how those standards didn't include asking me before selling my land or locking me out of my own property. One of the board members, Marvin, a little guy with a clipboard and a chip on his shoulder, started listing petty violations. Your kayak was left unattended at the lake without a permit. Your lawn doesn't meet the new landscaping code. I almost laughed. Who makes rules about kayaks? Apparently, these people do. But it wasn't just about kayaks or signs. It was about control. About sending a message that I was an outsider, a problem to be managed, or, better yet, erased. Yet, beneath all the frustration, I found something unexpected. Resolve. If they wanted a war, I'd give them one. Not with guns or tanks, but with every tool I had, legal smarts, grit, and a stubborn refusal to back down. I spent nights poring over documents, digging through county records, and gathering every scrap of proof I could find. Each forged signature was a nail in their coffin. Each dismissed complaint was fuel for the fire. And the best part? I wasn't alone. Some neighbors, quietly afraid before, started reaching out. They shared stories of unfair fines, threats, and intimidation. Together, we weren't just fighting for my land. We were fighting for the soul of our community. So, yeah, the battle lines are drawn, and these HOA bastards, they're about to learn that messing with a soldier's home has consequences. Stay with me. The next chapters, they get worse for them, and better for us. When I say the neighborhood had changed, I'm not exaggerating. Walking down my old street felt like slipping into someone else's life. The kids I once played catch with now barely glanced my way, and the fences, they weren't just borders anymore. They were walls built to shut me out. The first sign that this wasn't going to be a quiet return was the blocked driveway. Not just locked, but guarded by an oversized metal gate with a keypad I had no code for. I called Victoria, left her a message dripping with every ounce of sarcasm I had. "Hey Victoria, remember me, your friendly neighborhood property owner?" No answer. I tried the HOA office next. Marvin, clipboard in hand and attitude on overdrive, greeted me like I was a walking violation. "Mr. Turner, your kayak's been spotted again, unattended at the lakefront without a permit," he said like I was a kid caught stealing cookies. "That's a fine of $150.00." A fine for a kayak? It was almost comical if it wasn't so absurd. "So, parking my own kayak is a crime now?" I asked, voice calm but steady. Marvin blinked, clearly not expecting a fight. "It's against community standards," he said, like that explained everything. I glanced at my wristwatch, mentally calculating how long I had to endure this nonsense before my lawyer's letter arrived. Funny, I wasn't notified of any changes in standards, or that my property was supposedly sold. That's when I realized the HOA wasn't just trying to control, they were trying to erase me. My presence, my property, my voice. I wasn't just a homeowner anymore. I was a problem. The neighborhood meetings were even worse. Victoria, with her polished smile and ice-cold eyes, presided over each session like a queen on her throne. Every question I raised was met with thinly veiled contempt or dismissive glances. Other board members barely hid their disdain, eager to side with Victoria, who wielded power like a weapon. One night, at a particularly heated meeting, I caught Victoria whispering to a couple of neighbors, their faces twisted with worry and guilt. I later learned she was pressuring them to stay loyal or risk their own properties coming under scrutiny. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just a power trip. It was a calculated campaign to intimidate and isolate anyone who stood in Victoria's way. I saw it in Marvin's relentless patrols, in the anonymous letters slipped under doors threatening fines, and in the sudden, strict enforcement of rules that seemed tailor-made to trap me. But I refused to be the neighborhood ghost. Instead of retreating, I started pushing back. I made notes, took pictures, and recorded every interaction. I talked to neighbors quietly, hearing stories of their own run-ins with the HOA's heavy hand. Mrs. Jenkins, an elderly widow, confessed she'd paid hundreds in fines after a missing garden gnome was reported from her yard. Tim, a young dad, shared how he'd been threatened with legal action for parking his truck wrong. Together, these stories formed a tapestry of fear and control that Victoria had woven, and I was determined to unravel it. One afternoon, as I was photographing the gated driveway, Marvin pulled up in his tiny HOA-branded car. "You're trespassing," he said, his voice sharp. "I'll have to ask you to leave." I smiled. "Marvin, I own this land. I'm not trespassing. But you are blocking access without a legal order? That might get you into trouble." He hesitated, caught off guard by my calm. "I'm just doing my job." "Then maybe it's time you did the right one," I said, walking away. I knew I needed help, someone who could navigate the legal labyrinth this HOA had spun around me. That's when I called Maya Simmons, a local lawyer with a reputation for taking on cases others wouldn't touch. Her first question was blunt: "Do you have proof?" I handed her a folder bursting with documents, photos, letters, records of fines, and the suspicious sale papers I'd managed to dig up. Maya flipped through the files with a practiced eye. "Victoria's playing a dangerous game. Forged signatures, illegal sale. If we can prove this, you're not just fighting for your property, you're exposing a criminal scheme." That night, I sat on the dock, our family's old boat creaking beside me, thinking about how far this had come, from a simple property dispute to a battle against corruption that threatened more than just my land. It was about standing up for what's right, for fairness, for every person who'd been bullied into silence. The next steps would be tough. The HOA was powerful, with deep pockets and a hunger for control, but I wasn't the same guy who'd left for deployment. I was a man with a mission, and a neighborhood behind me. So no, this isn't just about kayaks or fences anymore. It's about reclaiming dignity, about showing a few entitled people that rules aren't weapons, and that justice, slow as it may be, has a way of finding its mark. Stay tuned. The next chapter? That's where the real fight begins. After handing Maya the pile of evidence, the game changed. Suddenly, this wasn't just my personal fight. It was a legal battle, with real teeth. But as anyone who's tangled with the law knows, battles like this aren't won overnight. Maya's office was a stark contrast to the polished facade of Victoria's HOA headquarters. She wasn't about show, she was about results. Over coffee, she laid out the stakes. Jack, forged documents are serious, but proving them, that's a maze, and Victoria's got a team ready to bury us in paperwork and delay tactics. I nodded, aware this would be a war of patience and precision. The stakes were more than just property lines. This was about justice, not only for me but for everyone crushed under the HOA's iron fist. We started by digging deeper. County offices, online records, even old paper files hidden in dusty basements. The sale that supposedly transferred my land was a patchwork of errors and inconsistencies. Dates that didn't match, signatures that looked like they were traced, and approval stamps that didn't exist. One afternoon, while poring over the documents, Maya leaned back and said, "You know, Jack, Victoria's playing a dangerous game. If we can prove intentional fraud, she could be looking at criminal charges, not just a civil dispute." That gave me a flicker of hope. This wasn't just about reclaiming what was mine, it was about taking down a corrupt system from the inside. But it wasn't just paperwork. The intimidation was real, and it was escalating. A few neighbors, initially silent, began to talk, quietly at first. Mrs. Jenkins confided she'd been bullied into paying hundreds of dollars in fines for alleged excessive noise from her yard parties. Tim told me about a letter threatening to seize his vehicle because it was too large for residential parking. I started meeting with these neighbors, gathering their stories, their evidence. Some were terrified of retaliation, but others were ready to stand up. Each story was a thread, weaving a larger tapestry of abuse and manipulation. One evening, as I was organizing testimonies, my phone buzzed. It was Maya. "Jack, I've set up a meeting with a few other residents. We need to build a coalition. If we show this isn't just your fight, the courts will take it more seriously." I agreed. Unity was strength, especially against a well-funded HOA machine. Our first coalition meeting was tense but promising. Neighbors I hadn't spoken to in years gathered in my garage, sharing their experiences. Some were angry, others just exhausted. The stories poured out. Fines for improper trash bin placement, threats over unauthorized landscaping, even accusations of illegal pet ownership. Victoria's grip on the community was tighter than I thought, but seeing these faces, frustrated but hopeful, ignited a new fire in me. We weren't just a handful of victims. We were a community ready to reclaim our home. Meanwhile, Victoria wasn't sitting still. I overheard from a neighbor that she was meeting with local officials, lobbying hard to dismiss our claims. Rumors swirled about plans to push through new regulations, making it harder for us to fight back. One day, Maya and I attended a county hearing. The room was packed. Victoria in her trademark suit, flanked by legal counsel and a group of supporters. She smiled politely, but there was ice beneath that smile. I watched as Maya methodically presented our case, highlighting the forged documents, the intimidation tactics, and the community's mounting evidence. The hearing wasn't a courtroom battle, but the tension was no less thick. Victoria countered with her own narrative, painting me as a disgruntled soldier with a grudge. She accused me of disrupting community harmony and questioned the validity of my neighbors' complaints. I sat through it all, jaw clenched but mind sharp. This was a battle of wills, and I wasn't backing down. After the hearing, Maya and I stood outside, discussing next steps. "Jack, the HOA will try to wear us down. They have resources and influence. We have to be smarter, faster, and more united." That night, I couldn't sleep. Memories of deployment mixed with the current fight. Back overseas, the enemy was clear. Here it was bureaucracy, manipulation, and greed. Different battlefield, same fight. One memory stood out. My platoon leader telling us, "When you're outnumbered, you get creative, use what you have." That advice became my mantra. So I started gathering more than legal evidence. I documented every interaction, every unfair fine, every threat. I posted updates on social media shining a light on the HOA's dirty tactics. The story spread, drawing local media attention. Victoria's office responded with threats, warning me about defamation and harassment, but the community support only grew louder. One afternoon, while walking the neighborhood, I bumped into an elderly man who'd been quietly observing the chaos. He shook my hand firmly. "Son, my family's lived here since before the lake was a puddle. You're doing right by us." That moment, simple as it was, reaffirmed why I was fighting. This wasn't just my land or my fight. It was everyone's right to live without fear of overbearing control. Still, I knew this was far from over. The legal battle was a marathon, not a sprint. Victoria had power, but we had truth and a growing army behind us. And as I looked out over the lake that evening, kayak tied to the dock, I felt something I hadn't in weeks. Hope. Because no matter how dark the fight gets, sometimes the quietest voices build the loudest resistance. After the county hearing, I thought maybe things would cool off, but Victoria had other plans. The very next week, a stack of fines landed on my doorstep like unwanted mail, each one more ridiculous than the last. There was a $300 0 cents penalty for unauthorized trash bin placement, another for exceeding lawn height, regulations, and, my personal favorite, a fine for excessive outdoor noise because my kids were playing in the backyard. I couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity, but beneath the humor simmered a fierce determination. These fines were no accident. They were tactical strikes, meant to wear me down and make me fold. At the next HOA meeting, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Victoria strutted in, clipboard in hand, eyes sharp and calculating. Her smile was razor thin, the kind that cuts just below the surface. As she listed off my fines, I spoke up, voice steady but firm. Let's be clear, none of these violations were ever communicated properly, and many are outright fabricated. A few heads in the room shifted uncomfortably. Marvin piped in, eager to back her up. "We have documentation and neighbor complaints, Mr. Turner." "Neighbor complaints or orchestrated whispers?" I shot back, because what I'm hearing is a campaign, not a community. Victoria's eyes flickered with annoyance, but she masked it well. "Community standards exist for a reason. Everyone must comply." I met her gaze. "Everyone, including the HOA itself?" That got a few chuckles and a few uneasy glances. Victoria quickly changed the subject, but the damage was done. The room's veneer of unanimity cracked, revealing underlying cracks in her control. Outside, a few neighbors approached me quietly. Mrs. Jenkins handed me a small envelope. Inside were copies of past fines she'd been forced to pay, some so petty they bordered on ridiculous. Tim shared a story of how his toddler's birthday party was reported for disturbing the peace. It was clear Victoria's grip was slipping, but she wasn't about to go down without a fight. To fight back, I needed allies, not just neighbors, but voices with power. I started reaching out to local community groups, veterans organizations, and even the media. A reporter from the town newspaper called, intrigued by the story of a deployed soldier fighting back against a corrupt HOA. That interview was a turning point. Suddenly, the story wasn't just mine, it was a symbol of standing up against abuse of power, of reclaiming rights lost in red tape and intimidation. Victoria's reaction was swift. She sent out a letter to the community painting me as a disruptive outsider, accusing me of stirring unrest and threatening neighborhood harmony. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here she was, the queen of control, accusing me of breaking the peace while she trampled on the rights of every homeowner. One afternoon, while walking past the gated driveway, I spotted a small group of residents whispering and glancing over their shoulders. One stepped forward, a middle-aged woman named Lisa, whom I barely knew. "I've been scared to say anything," she admitted, "but you're right, this HOA has been squeezing us all for years." She handed me a folder filled with documents, fines, letters, and notes. I've been saving these, hoping someone would fight back. Her courage sparked others to come forward. A quiet rebellion was stirring. At home that night, I sat by the lake, the familiar sound of water lapping against the dock soothing the chaos in my mind. My kids played nearby, unaware of the battles raging beyond our yard. I remembered my dad telling me, sometimes the fight isn't about how loud you yell, but how steady you stand. That steadiness was what I needed now. Victoria's next move was more aggressive. Utilities were cut to my property, a cold reminder of who held the real power. No water, no electricity. The neighborhood watched in silence, some sympathetic, others too fearful to act. But I refused to be broken. I rigged a temporary water supply and found an old generator in the garage. My family adapted. Neighbors brought over meals and candles. The message was clear. Intimidation would. One night, Maya called with news of a new legal avenue, state laws protecting deployed service members from property seizures and unfair treatment. "That's our opening," she said. "We're going to hit them where it hurts." The battle had shifted again. This wasn't just about fines or intimidation. It was about justice enshrined in law. I looked out at the dark lake, stars shimmering above, and felt a quiet confidence. The fight was far from over, but this time I had more than resolve. I had the law on my side and a community waking up to their own strength. The moment Maya mentioned the state protections for deployed service members, I felt a shift, like the tide turning after a long storm. Suddenly, the battle wasn't just David versus Goliath. It was backed by laws designed to protect people like me. Maya explained the details. "Jack, under the Servicemen Members Civil Relief Act, you're entitled to certain protections against property loss and unfair treatment while deployed. The HOA's actions? They could be violating federal law." That was a game changer. We moved quickly. Maya filed injunctions to stop the fines and prevent any further attempts to cut off utilities. We prepared a legal motion highlighting the HOA's forged documents and the intimidation tactics. Meanwhile, I kept rallying the community. The story had reached local media outlets, and suddenly, my fight was being covered by reporters who understood the injustice. At the next HOA meeting, the mood was different. Victoria's confident posture faltered when confronted by a small crowd of neighbors, armed with knowledge and support. "Mr. Turner has rights you can't ignore," one neighbor said quietly but firmly. "This isn't just a personal battle anymore." Victoria tried to regain control, but the room was shifting. The community was waking up. One afternoon, while reviewing case files with Maya, I couldn't help but reflect on the journey. From a soldier abroad to a man defending his family's legacy on the home front. It was exhausting, but empowering. Maya smiled, sensing my mixed emotions. "This is about more than property. It's about standing up when others stay silent." That night, I posted an update on social media, photos of the lake, the gate, and the neighbors who stood with me. The response was overwhelming. Messages from veterans, homeowners, and even strangers poured in, sharing stories of similar battles and offering support. The HOA, sensing the tide, launched a counterattack, sending legal threats accusing me of defamation. Their lawyer's letter was thick with jargon but thin on substance. I forwarded it to Maya, who chuckled. "They're trying to bluff. We have facts and law on our side." The legal battle intensified, but so did my resolve. I kept documenting, kept talking, and kept fighting, not just for me, but for everyone who had been pushed down by people like Victoria. One afternoon, as I repaired the old dock my father built, a group of neighbors gathered. We shared stories and plans, turning that weathered wood and rusted nails into a symbol of resilience. Victoria's grip was slipping and the community's spirit was rising. The fight was far from over, but now, armed with law, community, and determination, I knew we had a real chance. With the legal injunctions slowing Victoria's advances, I thought I could finally breathe, but she had one last trick up her sleeve, cutting off the power to my property. No notice, no warning. One morning, the lights didn't come on, the heater stayed cold, and the silence in the house was deafening. I stood in the dark living room, feeling the weight of isolation settle like a stone in my chest. It wasn't just the lack of electricity. It was a reminder that Victoria controlled more than just rules. She controlled comfort, safety, the very basics of living. Neighbors peered cautiously from behind curtains. A few brave souls slipped me candles and hot meals, their quiet acts of rebellion sparking a flicker of warmth. I rigged up an old generator in the backyard, its sputtering noise breaking the eerie silence. The hum was a lifeline, a small victory against a bully who thought she could starve me into submission. But the fight wasn't just about keeping the lights on. It was about shining a spotlight on Victoria's cruelty. That week, Maya and I launched a new campaign, gathering affidavits from neighbors who had suffered under the HOA's oppressive reign. We compiled stories of fines for broken fences, threats over garden gnomes, and harassment for children playing too loudly. One afternoon, Lisa, the woman who'd handed me those documents weeks ago, joined me by the generator's glow. "I was scared before," she said quietly, "but seeing you stand up gave me strength. I'm done being silent." Her words echoed a truth I'd felt all along. Change begins with courage, but it spreads through community. Meanwhile, Victoria's attempts to silence me drew the attention of local officials. Complaints about utility cutoffs and harassment prompted investigations that Victoria hadn't anticipated. At a community gathering held in my backyard, powered by that stubborn generator, we shared our stories openly. The night air buzzed with resolve and whispered plans for the road ahead. Marvin, once Victoria's staunchest enforcer, surprised us all by showing up. His eyes were tired, regret etched into every line of his face. "I never wanted it to go this far," he confessed. "I was just following orders." That moment, fraught with tension, marked a subtle shift. Even those once blinded by loyalty began to see the cracks in Victoria's empire. As I looked around at my neighbors, some wary, some hopeful, I realized this was more than a property dispute. It was a fight for dignity, for fairness, for the right to call this place home without fear. That night, with the generator humming and the lake reflecting the moon's steady glow, I felt a quiet pride. We were battered, but unbroken. Victoria might control the rules, but we controlled the spirit. And spirits, once awakened, are hard to contain. The backyard gatherings grew in size and spirit. Word had spread beyond our little corner of the lake, and with that, new faces joined. Neighbors, reporters, even local officials curious about the story brewing beneath Victoria's reign. Each meeting was a mix of laughter, serious talk, and the shared understanding that this was no longer just my fight, it was ours. Victoria's hold on the neighborhood was visibly weakening. Rumors of her mounting legal troubles began circulating, and her usual confident posture seemed to falter behind closed doors. But she was far from finished. Just when we thought the tide was turning, she dropped a bombshell. One morning, a bulldozer appeared at the edge of my property. Rumor had it the HOA was moving forward with a commercial development plan, plans that ignored zoning laws and, more importantly, ignored the rightful ownership of the land. I was standing at the dock, watching the machines chew up the shoreline, when my phone buzzed with a call from Maya. "Jack, this isn't just intimidation anymore. This is destruction. We need to act fast." That moment, the calm lake felt like a battlefield. The machines roared, but so did my determination. I rallied the neighbors once more, coordinating with environmental experts and local activists. We gathered petitions, held protests, and pushed for emergency injunctions to halt the development. The fight had escalated from paperwork and fines to protecting the very earth beneath our feet. One afternoon, I stood with a group of neighbors, holding signs and chanting slogans, when a reporter asked, "Why keep fighting? Isn't it easier to just give in?" I looked out at the lake, then back at the crowd. Because this isn't just about land. It's about standing up to those who think power gives them the right to erase history, family, and community. The protest drew media coverage, putting Victoria under a spotlight she desperately wanted to avoid. The county officials, pressured by public outcry, scheduled hearings to investigate the HOA's actions. Inside the courtroom, the tension was palpable. Victoria's team threw every legal trick they could muster, but Maya was relentless, presenting evidence that painted a clear picture of fraud and abuse. Victoria sat stiffly, her calm facade cracking with every testimony that exposed her lies. After hours of arguments and rebuttals, the judge granted an immediate halt to the development plans, ordering a full review of the HOA's actions. Outside the courthouse, the neighborhood erupted in cheers. I felt a surge of pride, not just in myself, but in every person who refused to stay silent. That night, standing on the dock with my family, I realized how much this fight had changed me. I wasn't just defending land, I was defending a legacy, a community, and a way of life. And as the moonlight danced on the water, I knew this was just the beginning of reclaiming what was rightfully ours. The court's decision to halt the development was a victory, but it didn't end the fight. If anything, it marked a new phase, one where Victoria's tactics became more desperate and subtle. Her empire, once confident and imposing, began to show cracks, but she was still dangerous. I remember the day she showed up at my front gate. No threats this time, just a calm, measured smile. "Jack," she said, voice low, "you're making this very difficult for everyone. Don't you think it's time to let this go?" I looked her in the eye. "Victoria, I'm not fighting for a prize. I'm fighting for what's right, and I won't stop." That silence between us spoke volumes. Behind the scenes, Victoria was scrambling to regain control. The HOA board meetings, once dominated by her, now fractured into factions. Some members quietly distanced themselves, fearing the growing backlash. Neighbors who had once feared speaking out began attending meetings, voicing concerns, asking questions. The atmosphere shifted from intimidation to accountability. At one such meeting, a young couple stood up to demand transparency. Their courage was contagious, sparking a wave of support that Victoria struggled to silence. Meanwhile, I continued working with Maya, preparing for the next legal battle. We uncovered more evidence, emails, recorded conversations, showing deliberate attempts to cover up the forged sale and intimidate dissenters. One afternoon, Maya handed me a file. "Jack, this could be the nail in the coffin. Proof that Victoria and her allies planned this from the start." Reading through the documents, I felt a surge of vindication. The truth was finally coming to light. But the fight wasn't just legal. The neighborhood was healing too. Where fences had divided us, conversations began to build bridges. Neighbors shared meals, stories, and plans to rebuild community trust. One evening, as we gathered around a bonfire on the lakeshore, I thought about the journey. From the first letter that tried to steal my land to this moment of solidarity and hope. Victoria's name was fading from conversations, replaced by talk of unity and rebuilding. I caught a glimpse of the lake, calm under the stars. It reminded me of my father's words, "A strong community is like a sturdy boat. You need every hand on deck to weather the storm." We'd weathered ours. As Victoria's grip loosened and the community began to breathe again, the real work of rebuilding started. But for me, it wasn't just about patching fences or clearing misunderstandings. It was about making sure what happened could never happen again. Victoria had been ousted, but her influence lingered in whispers and old grudges. Some neighbors still bore scars from the years of fear and fines. I knew that healing would take time, and leadership that wasn't about power, but service. So, I stepped forward. At the next community meeting, I stood before the crowd, the weight of the journey heavy but steady on my shoulders. "We've been through a lot," I said, "but this isn't the end. It's a new beginning. We have a chance to build something better, fairer, stronger, and kinder." The room nodded, faces reflecting hope mingled with caution. We talked about creating a new community association, one rooted in transparency and respect. No secret agendas, no bullying tactics, just neighbors working together. Lisa, once silent and scared, now stood proudly beside me. "I never thought I'd see this day," she said, "but here we are." One afternoon as I walked along the lake, a couple I hadn't met before stopped me. They thanked me for fighting, not just for property, but for dignity. Their words reminded me that this battle was about more than land. It was about humanity. Back home, Maya called with news that the legal proceedings were wrapping up. The forged documents were officially nullified, and Victoria faced charges for fraud and intimidation. Justice, slow as it was arriving. The neighborhood began organizing events, picnics, cleanup days, storytelling nights. The old dock where my father once fished became a gathering spot, a symbol of our renewed community. One evening, as children played by the water and neighbors shared laughter, I sat quietly, letting the peace wash over me. It wasn't just victory, it was healing. Victoria's shadow had faded, replaced by light, and I knew that our fight, our resilience, had made that possible. With the community healing and justice unfolding, I found myself standing at a crossroads. The fight against Victoria and her HOA wasn't just a chapter in my life anymore, it was a turning point for all of us. The question now was, what comes next? The answer came in the form of a new community association meeting. Unlike the secretive, fear-driven HOA of the past, this one was open, inclusive, and rooted in shared values. Neighbors filled the modest town hall, voices eager but respectful, eyes bright with cautious hope. I took a deep breath before stepping to the podium. We're not here just to rewrite rules, we're here to rewrite how we live together, to build trust where there was suspicion, and to ensure no one feels powerless in their own home. The room responded with nods and murmurs of agreement. Lisa, once too afraid to speak, now stood alongside me as a committee member. Others volunteered, ready to take part in shaping a fair future. The old wounds didn't disappear overnight. Some still hesitated, their skepticism a reminder of the long road ahead. But what was different now was the openness. No hidden agendas, no unchecked authority. We implemented clear channels for communication and conflict resolution, so no one would ever feel isolated or silenced. One afternoon, as I walked through the neighborhood, I spotted Marvin tending to a garden. The same Marvin who once patrolled like an enforcer, now nurturing life instead of policing it. He caught my eye and gave a small, genuine smile. Change was possible. At home that evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees, I sat on the dock, my family nearby, the water calm and inviting. I thought about my dad, how he taught me the value of standing firm and the power of community. Our fight had been more than a battle over land. It was about dignity, fairness, and the strength we find in each other. As I looked out over the lake, I knew this peace was hard-won, but deeply deserved. In this new beginning, it was ours to protect. The evening air was cool as I made my way to the small family cemetery on the edge of our property. The headstone, worn but dignified, bore my father's name. A man who had built more than a dock or a house, he had built a legacy. I knelt before the stone, running my hand over the smooth granite. "Dad, we're getting there," I whispered. "This fight, it's not just about land anymore, it's about respect, about standing for what's right no matter the cost." The memories came flooding back, his steady hands guiding me on the lake, his quiet words about perseverance and dignity. He never sought conflict, but he never backed down when it mattered. That same resolve had carried me through every meeting, every court date, every late-night drafting plans with Maya. Later, over coffee with Maya, I shared my thoughts. "It's strange," I said, "how a battle over property became something much bigger. I never expected to find a community, or myself, like this." She smiled. "That's the thing about fights worth fighting. They change you." The weight of that truth settled with me. This wasn't just a victory in court or a reclaimed dock. It was personal growth, a testament to the power of standing firm. Then came the letters. From neighbors, from strangers, from veterans who saw in my story a reflection of their own struggles. One letter stood out, a young soldier deployed overseas, thanking me for fighting when he couldn't. Those words, simple but profound, reinforced the responsibility I carried, not just for my family, but for every person who needed to believe in justice. I shared those letters at the next community meeting. The room was quiet, but the emotion was palpable. We weren't just neighbors anymore. We were a family, bound by shared trials and triumphs. Walking home afterward, the night sky stretched wide above me. The lake shimmered under the stars, peaceful and vast. I thought about the journey, from shock and disbelief to action and healing. And I knew one thing for certain: this peace, hard-won and deeply cherished, was worth every struggle. The calm that settled over the neighborhood felt almost surreal after months of turmoil. The lake reflected a sky wiped clean of storms, and for the first time in a long while, I felt the weight of the fight lifting from my shoulders. But victory doesn't always roar. It often whispers in quiet moments like this. Victoria's reign was over. Legal battles concluded, and the community had reclaimed its voice, yet the real triumph was deeper, rooted in resilience, justice, and the unyielding spirit of neighbors who refused to be silenced. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low, I hosted a small barbecue by the lake. Neighbors gathered, children laughed, and old stories were swapped with new smiles. The dock, once a battleground, was now a stage for celebration. I caught sight of Marvin, no longer an enforcer but a friend, grilling burgers with a grin that didn't hide his relief. Lisa was telling a joke, and the young couple who had once challenged Victoria stood arm in arm, their eyes bright with hope. It was a scene that felt almost too good to be true, but it was real. And then, just when I thought the story was closed, I heard a surprising rumor. Victoria had quietly taken a job far from here, working a humble position at a local store. No longer the queen of the neighborhood, but a figure of irony and quiet justice. Sometimes, life has a way of balancing itself. As I stood watching the sun set over the water, I felt a profound sense of peace. The fight had tested me in ways I never imagined. It had shaped me, strengthened me, and connected me to a community that stood tall together. To anyone watching this, caught in the grip of their own HOA nightmare or any battle that feels too big, Remember this: power is not always where you think it is. Sometimes the real power lies in knowing the rules, being patient, and standing your ground. And if you ever find yourself underestimated, keep this in mind: you might just be the one holding the winning hand.